All right. Well, I have these amazing inner selves cards right here. And I start this with my team, and I start this every time we have a business meeting. And it's so good to be with you, Tamar.
So good to be with you too, Bridget.
Wow.
What a way to start a day. I could get used to this.
I love it. Now, normally, and I'm not looking, might have you say stop shuffling, but a card has literally jumped out.
I trust the
So,
process.
yeah. So I'm going to pull it. I see it's face side up, but I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at the card. So we're both going to see it at the same time. I have no idea what it is.
Ooh.
The risk taker.
Ooh.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. Well, let's jump in. Well, you know what? Two cards jumped out. So I
Seriously?
may as well do them both. Here's the other one, the responsible one. Literally, we're shuffling and those two leaped out and landed face up. So let's just jump in. Why don't you start and say what those two cards mean for you and why now, maybe, and then I'll say mine.
Yeah. The first thing that comes up for me is, kind of this is a stretch for you reaching out and, in the social media way. And yeah, it feels, like an honor and a risk, but it's a stretch. And for us to be able to connect in this way and put out who we are and what we do and what we love and what we share together, and that the responsible came in with the risk, it feels, I don't know, it came up from me almost as those niggling voices in our heads,
I do. Yes, I do.
kind of like if we turn it into a response, like if we there's being responsible, like we're both present, we're here, we're available, we're doing what we're doing. But if the responsible takes over the process, could get kind of over structured, it could get kind of formal, it could become a pressure. So it felt almost like a little, the word isn't warning, but like a reminder to hold it in balance, hold our process in balance, hold this experience in balance.
I love that. And of course, now I can't share my impressions without taking in all of your wisdom, which is when you and I both teach voice dialogue, that's part of the group wisdom. Like I understand myself better when I hear someone else talk about their parts. Because honestly, I would not have thought of this originally, but I love what you said because it also, the risk taker, I agree completely. We're taking a risk, and I've taken a lot of risks in my life. I'm compelled to take risks apparently, but I also have a really dour, responsible one who can make anything a task, literally. And I have to be careful, like you said, to keep it in balance. But I never put them together this way. If the urge to take a risk, which right now it is what you said, getting out more in social media and sharing the power of inner selves, I'm not being responsible to my risk taker. Like it's a responsibility sometimes to be divinely inspired. So thank you for adding that element because yes, taking risks responsibly can sound like one thing, but hey, if I don't take the risk, then I haven't in a way been responsible for the inspirations that have come my way.
Yeah, yeah, lovely. And one of the things on that card that, when I look at the image on that card, the person, climbing a mountain peak, which is beyond anything I could imagine. But it looks like there's a little rose like growing out
Yeah.
of the mountain. Like, so there's this gift, there's this growth, in taking the risk, but doing it responsibly.
I love that. Well, I'm going to go straight to a question that I've been wondering, and I'm going to show everyone. So this is your Selves in the Box, which you created, Tamar. And maybe we'll talk more about voice dialogue and your lineage and inheritance with that. But this box is so divinely inspired. And I've never asked you its origin story. Like, how did you think of it? How did you think about what the visuals would go with which selves? I'd love to hear your process and when and how long and
Well, to be truthful, I mean, the conception happened a long time ago. this was not an overnight experience. But I remember I was living in Los Angeles and I was just meandering, which is probably part of the download that happened. I went into the spiritual bookstore and I was just meandering. I wasn't on a time clock. I wasn't rushing. I was just sort of hanging out in the bookstore looking, and all of a sudden it was like an alignment. All of a sudden it was like, you have to create a card deck based on these inner selves and based on the psychology of selves and this consciousness model. You need to create a card deck and make this accessible. And that was like 25 something years ago. And it took a long time. But what I would say in the process, I had two prayers to God, Spirit, call it what you will. I said, please, my two prayers for this Selves in a Box is one that the images would be evocative, that when people look at the images, it would bring up things, that they would feel things or sense things or think about things or be invoked. And the second prayer was that the deck would be connected to spirit, that it would feel like you can't make this up. Like I can't, this is amazing what, and being humble about that. Like this is connected, and both my prayers were answered. And I'm so grateful because, every time I work with the deck and I work with people or myself, I'm just like, this is beyond me. This is something else is going on. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful.
And how did you find the artist? Were there stuck moments, and how did you handle that?
A friend of mine, knew of a woman, Addie Hopkins. She lived locally nearby. She didn't knew nothing about voice dialogue and really wasn't a psychology person, or she just was on her own, kind of creative path. But she took the names of 5 selves to her, just the names and like what they represent. And she came back with some renderings just as a test to see if I felt that she captured a sense of image that goes along with the self. And I was kind of blown away. It turned out that she knew nothing about the work I do and the world I live served. And she just did this rendering of these collage renderings, but she was connected. And I was blown away how she just managed to invoke. And it's interesting because the one that I had the most trouble with, because she would bring the images to me to, run by each one and we tweak it. But the critic probably cost me the most money. And I had the most challenge, coming to peace with that card. So it's interesting how that works.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So the critic was acting out about its own card. Wow. And then also, I want to show that you include an absolutely wonderful guide in your box. And how I use it is I look and see how I feel myself about a card, or if I'm working with clients, I want them to have their original thoughts, impressions. And then we go to your extraordinary book, which you have really put some beautiful descriptions. You break it down very simply, like what's the personality motivation of a self and what's its essence motivation. But then you also include much larger descriptions. I'll just give a sense for each card. And you're right. So what was your process with the writing of it? Because that too feels divinely inspired. And I'm not saying that metaphorically, because I've worked with these cards now since you published them. I don't know what year that is.
2011.
And I have a story I want to tell you, but I mean, every single time people are affected. Now, as you and I both know, that doesn't always mean positive. Sometimes it mirrors difficult things, but it's because it needs to be dealt with or handled or grieved. So that's the other thing. I just want to make sure everyone knows we're not talking about this all just, here's a great way to put on rose-colored glasses. Not at all. Sometimes it's quite difficult what a self might represent that person picks. But your box handles that because that's life.
Yeah. And, as you know, with the philosophy of the psychology of selves, is that all selves are created equal. And that was something I really wanted to portray in this deck. I chose 52 cards, or selves to represent as cards. There's so many more, there's so many more, but I just, I kind of wanted it to meet the criteria of a card deck, just so people know there's so many more. But also that there's no such thing as like a good self and a bad self. What makes a self negative in our lives is if we're over identified with it. If that self is in the driver's seat of our inner car and controlling our lives, it will have a negative effect at some point. That's what's negative, not the self itself, but it's running of our lives. And it could be a single self or a conglomerate of selves that are running our lives, and that it's how we're seeing the world, how the world is seeing us back, but also what can be negative if we have no access to a self, if it's repressed or disowned, and we don't have access, let's say, to our creativity in any shape or form, or that will have a negative impact. But the self itself is it's just who it is. It's just a self. And that's what I really wanted to bring through in this deck was it almost like its essence, its neutrality. This is who it is. We make it good or bad by our over identification or lack of identification.
Love that. Yeah. I mean, and you put that if particular self is primary and a particular self is disowned, it's so helpful because again, it's something I've come to think of selves on a spectrum. Like if you're 100% responsible all the time, that is not good. And that's not even good for your health. You might get stressed and constricted and over promise and it's leading to anxiety. But if you're at 0%, you can't be counted on and you're not going to feel good about yourself. So it's like how much, volume, and do you need more? I mean, the other thing, and we'll get maybe more into voice dialogue itself, but if you need more of a particular self because it's important because of what's going on in your life, that's the other thing. You can access it. Okay, so Tamar, I want to tell you a story about your cards. And I'm being wilded out right this very minute. Something even fell. My energy is so wild. Okay. So years ago, I was teaching a voice dialogue training. And as I said, we do the cards, we start each day with your cards. Well, and it was a 5-day training and it was the same people over the 5 days. It was a level 1 and a level 2. So this particular participant kept getting the same card. Literally, I guess if it was 5 days, 4 out of the 5 days, totally shuffled, totally random. And she did not like this card. This was a self that she was deeply disowned with. Then one of the participants happened to be a financial person because after the third time and then the fourth time, he did the math and he said, this is statistically impossible.
Wow.
Statistically impossible that we would have this self given 52 cards, et cetera, et cetera. He did all this math. Okay. So remember just now when I pulled this book out to talk about how you have the personality motivation and the essence motivation? This was the card. Can you see? It was the follower. And that's what I randomly opened it up to just now.
Wow.
I'm having chills. It's unfolding during our time together.
That's amazing. And that you just said something so important, Bridgit, because if we have an overly positive response to a self, or a judgment and aversion response, that means something. It's not good, bad, right, wrong. It just means something that we're having an aversion response. It's giving us information that this self is maybe disowned, available, or we have a judgment on this self, which is making it so it's not finding its sort of organic way. And even the whole thing with followers, so many people, oh, I don't want to be a follower. I'm a leader.
Exactly.
But I'm just if you think of even that showing up right now with us, I'm following your lead, then you follow me back. I say something that you on and it's such a beautiful dynamic. It's like the essence of follower, like we're following each other right now. And it's beautiful.
Yeah. And wildly, she was pregnant. So she was going to have to be following an infant quite
Oh,
soon. I mean,
what?
and also I love everything you said because the other thing is there are societally approved selves. And this is
Yeah.
where different cultures can still use these because in one culture, the follower might be what is expected, like that tall poppy syndrome. Have you heard of that? Don't be a tall poppy means don't stand out and be a follower. You don't want to be the big, bold, singular person. But I know in New York City and LA, and perhaps even bolder, being a follower societally has a negative connotation, like you don't think for yourself, you're not a full being. And so the other thing is to bring that into the exploration. And
Yeah.
sometimes like to say what we do is we make contemporary relationships with these different parts of ourselves. Do you still hate your XYZ self because that self was rejected in your original family? Well, how do you feel about this one now? And
Yes.
and that is also so empowering. Is that your opinion of that part of you, or is it just an inherited opinion you haven't explored yet? Wait a minute, you actually disagree. It's liberating.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful point. And it comes to the point of, that to realize that the majority of ourselves, or at least our primary selves, our more dominant selves are born in our younger years in our families of origin. And they're born, a lot of them, to protect us, to keep us as safe as possible on all kinds of different levels. It's so sad that we needed the level of protection that we did, but we did. And I have not yet met someone from a fully functional family. Maybe nowadays, with the consciousness evolving, the parents today are far more conscious, but, so these selves were born to protect us, but some of them, as we grow older, are continuing to protect us as if we're still living under the roof of our family of origin, and we're not. So the idea of updating these selves, like even giving voice or journal writing or talking to our own selves, and like giving them a new job description, letting them help update their job description. It's not that the selves are going to go away or that we want them to. They all have they're like gems, or frequencies of a crystal. They all have the reason to be, but we can update, from our child, their role from our childhood to currently in our life, and what that would mean or look like.
I always say every self has a noble purpose, and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how dysfunctional that self is in its behavior. Often the behavior has to be dealt with, but that self, regardless, was born to protect you from your vulnerability and from your potential abandonment. So I couldn't agree more, Tamar.
Yeah.
That's why they're so connected to our essence.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
leads me to, I guess, backing into this question. So, you are the daughter of Hal Stone, who co created voice dialogue with his wife, your stepmom, Sidra Stone, who I got lucky enough for them to be my longtime mentors. And I'm thrilled about that. But you are their daughter. And I believe you've literally been there since the beginning. And I'd love to hear. Maybe you could tell us what voice dialogue is in your own words, and when you realized, maybe when it's like, oh, I grew up with this, but it's mine too, because you're carrying the legacy on. I can say your beloved father, who was a beloved to me as well, has passed, and Sidra is still with us at this point. And I'd love to hear whatever you want to share about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my father he was a Jungian analyst, and he came out of those roots. But at some point in my probably early teens, he stepped away. It's like he was guided to leave the Jung Society and to open up to something else, which ended up, it's like he got a download. And then the download he got, he shared with Sidra, my stepmom, and they really, wrote about it and taught and brought it to the world. And the download was really this concept of selves. Not that the concept of selves was brand new, because even Rumi, in his beautiful poem, The Guest House, talks about the selves in such a beautiful way, really approaching the selves in this honoring way and acknowledging way. And so, it really came to be called the psychology of selves and the aware ego process. And then voice dialogue is the technique. Voice dialogue is the technique for giving voice to the selves. But the premise is that we all have selves. We all have selves, and what makes us different is the degree to which we over-identify with certain selves and repress and disown others. And I make a distinction between repress and disown. That disown is sort of like it's off the radar screen of our consciousness. We don't even know that self exists. And repressed is sort of like we know it's there, but we kind of like push it under the carpet. So I love that distinction because it's just true for certain selves. So it's so truly, to me, empowering to begin to see ourselves this is like at the personality level, we have a soul as well and a spirit, and we can be connected to, and that's, it's voice dialogue and the psychology of selves and the aware ego process is really like a consciousness model, a way of being conscious of what's happening in real time and past with ourselves. And then it becomes this amazing bridge of perception in relationship to other. Because as we understand our own selves, we can understand the selves of others as well, and the dynamics between selves. And it's very empowering. And to have an awareness that's greater than, like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's empowering because the term ego has such a bad rap. And a lot of spiritual traditions, so leave your ego at the door. And I actually think we need an ego. We couldn't survive life on beautiful planet Earth without one. We're interacting with people and our work environments and life and money and stress and relationships and our neighbors, and we're doing all day long. So we need an ego, but to have an ego that has an awareness of selves and an understanding, it's so empowering. It truly is. Like the operating ego term is like we're identified with a certain self. We're seeing out of the lens of the self. We're seeing and we're being seen by the world in that way. But when we get above that, when we bring awareness and consciousness and experience, we're actually able to see and feel and sense ourselves, but we're not identified. It's liberating, to your point.
I agree. And there's just so many things we could share about this. And I stumbled upon it. I literally read about voice dialogue in a book called Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. And because I was not happy, I was struggling emotionally. Shame was a big part of what I was going through. And I'm like, okay, this book will solve my problem. I mean, I was going with hope. And I just remember at the end of the book, and I actually recommend people read it. It's a classic. It's old-fashioned language. So people who don't like certain language and use of pronouns, that's well before all of that. I just like to put that caveat. But it's got very important principles that are still important today about shame. And so I used to think of shame as pus. It's like a body infection. I mean, when one is full of shame, it's awful. So voice dialogue was described at the end because even he admitted he didn't like the term alternative modalities, but he had I'm making it up, but 10 or 17 alternative modalities at the end of his book. And I read voice dialogue and literally my body was electrified. And I'm
Wow.
like, that's it. That's it. And then I hunted down your parents, the doctors Hal and Sidra Stone, which meant I called their 800 number. And that was very late 1994, early 1995. And I found people in New York to do it. And I was a performer at the time. So I also liked it because the other aspect of voice dialogue is that it can be a creativity tool in itself. And I once had a client come because he was recommended one time because he was writing a novel and he had trouble with this character. He just couldn't relate to this character. We did one session only and we went to that part of him I don't even really know. And I just followed it. I didn't know him. And at the end, he's like, I got it. I know my way in. Thank you very much. And I never saw him again. And so that's the other thing I love about voice dialogue. You can use it like a paintbrush if you want to. But what happened to me was that I saw people getting healed so quickly when I was getting trained as a voice dialogue facilitator, just because I was interested. I was a professional performer at the time. It changed my life. That's why I went to school, became a psychotherapist, and used creativity as part of my psychotherapy practice, and wrote my book based on the competing agendas of ourselves. And that's why we get stuck. We think we want everything with every fiber of our being, but we don't. And for many, success is a terrifying arena. And there are
Yes.
parts that are like, oh, no, I don't need all of that attention. And you just have to deal with it. And I have one chapter in my book, which is let go of the goal. I realized my book was all about the type A, do it, do it. And I thought, oh no, I have to do the other side and have a whole chapter. Like, do you want to just hike on weekends and not have some important project? And maybe for right now, that's it. You get up, do your life, you go to sleep, and let it go if you're just using it as an instrument of torture. So again, I was divinely led, and voice dialogue changed my life, continues to. And then I get to meet people like you as a result. Your parents were so supportive of me and my learning it and getting more and more grounded in it. It's just been extraordinary, and certainly not what I expected. It's like following up, following. I just followed, and
Yeah.
it's worked out.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same, even though I'm my father's daughter. I feel like even if I wasn't, we would still be sitting here today having this conversation because, like I felt called. A lot of kids push off, and I think went through that phase of kind of pushing off and I got to do my own thing. I don't want to be a psychotherapist, all that. But life had like my sole purpose. Life had a different plan for me than my personality, than my pushing off rebellious selves, and I landed, head over heels in my father's garden and in the work. And I'm so grateful. I'm just so grateful. And yeah, I feel it's like litter mates, like we're part of.
Yes, I love that. And we
Yeah.
both adore dogs, so that's the perfect metaphor. My tail is wagging right now, Tamar.
Yeah, mine
Well,
too.
I'm just wondering, like, is there anything you would like people to get out of your box of cells? Like, did you have desires in particular?
I didn't feel particularly attached to, but more just for people to explore and also make it theirs. Sometimes I talk to people and they tell me how they're using the cards, and I'm like, I love that. I love that. This is how you shuffle. You shuffle, 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 and then you pull the card at the bottom. Or when you do a reading, you also include that bottom card. I mean, I learn things from people, as the Selves in a Box is my second born child. My firstborn child hasn't left home yet, late 20s, and I'm still living at home, energetically. But I feel like I have this healthy firstborn or second-born child who left home, and every so often, I welcome hearing feedback from people. Oh, I met your child. I use the box, or a friend turned me onto it, and it's really making a difference in my life. Or using it in meetings and groups. What I find in group work, like you shared in a lot of your teamwork with the people you work with, you start the time or the session with everyone drawing a card, and what happens is you drop in.
Yeah.
It takes away that sort of superficial, like, yeah, it's been a little bit of a stressful week, and all of a sudden you're just in. You're being with, why is this self showing up at this time? And so you're sharing from this place deeper in, and then received in that deeper way. And, oh gosh, if everybody did that, everywhere we went, we were dropping in, and God, how lovely would that be?
That would be so lovely. And I love what you said, because I know Hal and Sidra treat voice dialogue similarly. Like, they were like, this is like you said, a method for accessing inner selves, which is vital. But after that, they gave their blessing to be as creative as anybody wanted to be. I mean, people used it for sand tray therapy. I know industrial psychologists brought it to their companies, and and again, just like you with your box of cards of inner selves, it seems like the similar attitude. Like, here, we have this, but go forth and multiply with our blessings. And I love that too.
Yeah.
I know that I've given the cards or suggested, and I do remember more than one person went and bought several boxes because they wanted each family member to get their own. I know, I
That's
know.
so
Now they may have had an agenda, but that's okay.
Yeah. And there's one other piece about the consciousness of, inner selves is it's not just that we have inner selves, but that by being able to stand in the middle, we're really getting out of duality. Without even studying non-dual consciousness, we're getting out of duality. It's like this part of me feels this way and I can hear it and feel it and sense it. And there's an opposite self that feels a different way. And there's no judgment. It's just like I'm hearing both sides. I'm feeling and sensing and having compassion for both sides. And then the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, have to make a choice. So it gives us this capacity for choosing that's without judgment or shaming or blaming, but just it's like stepping up and out, but valuing and acknowledging and hearing, and it's like a complete experience.
Yeah. And also that it's in our physiology. It's not an intellectual concept. Like, we pick the responsible one and the risk taker. And we could talk about them, and quite beautifully, probably, I will add, but our responsible one lives in our body and has a particular energy and energetic signature. And we picked two cards because that's what stumbled today. And so you'd have the responsible one, and I like to say an opposite. For some person, it could be an irresponsible one, but for someone else, it could be a non-responsive self. Like, that's all right. I always say an opposite. Like, it's hot has many opposites, and it's not just cold. And then we also had the risk taker, which the opposite could be a fearful one, but it could also be the planner. Again, but either way, it's not duality at all, because those two cards represented four selves right there. And all of that, back to the jewel, the facets of the jewel, it's not at all unidimensional or even just double dimension. It's multifaceted, and it just brings it out. And then, to me, because more and more neurological testing, because they've got beautiful machines now, they're showing that our sense of self is not in one place, and that different selves have different pathways. And so I do think once you start to get aware of where these cells live in your body, you're activating more intelligence than just your brain, because our intelligence is not limited to our brain, our instincts. And so
Yeah.
it hooks you into more of yourself again, without it having to be an intellectual exercise. You just like go right to these selves, and you're already doing it. And it's not about it. It is it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love what you're saying, because when I was creating the cards, I almost did subcategories. I almost added categories like, is this card a mental self, a more spiritual self, a more heartful self, a more primal or visceral kind of, I almost like I have play decks, where I had emblems of these different quadrants. But I didn't end up doing it because it made it more open. But yeah, to get that we have selves that source out of different places in our body and different domains, and to honor that, and that I'm not a big goal person, but if there is a goal, that we have the chance to, like, have it all and experience it all.
Which I think is a wonderful place to stop for today. You're welcome to come back anytime, Tamar.
I'd be honored. Breakfast with Bridgit.
Love it. Love it. Or lately, I like to call it blunch, which is like brunch, lunch, that late morning, early afternoon meal time.
Count me
Blunch.
in. Help me.
Oh, thank you so much for all of this and for your
And
box of cards, which literally is a tool of connection to oneself and the divine.
thank you, Bridget. Such an honor.